Now, there has been condemnation from MPs across the political spectrum to some of the violence after a third night of trouble in England and fears of further unrest. The Sunderland Central Labour MP Lewis Atkinson said a link could be drawn between the disorder in his constituency last night and the ashes, as he put it, of the English Defence League, although the group has formally been disbanded. Speaking to Times Radio earlier, Mr. Atkinson accused Stephen Christopher Yaxley Lennon, better known as the far-right activist Tommy Robinson, of stoking community tensions.
Clearly, this was a far-right stoked protest where the likes of Stephen Yaxley Lennon was tweeting about it. The fact, I'm afraid, unfortunately for us, that it was the only such so-called protest that was due to take place yesterday evening across the country, I think meant that people who of a certain persuasion who wanted a Friday night of yobbery were attracted to Sunderland. We know that there were far-right banners demonstrated during the events of yesterday night, including a northeast spin out off from the old EDL. So, that gives me the information that I have that this is not about normal, hard-working people of Sunderland.
Now, we're seeing reports coming in from several different locations. There have been some clashes in Blackpool, where people gathered outside the town hall. There's a heavy police presence in Preston, but limited numbers there. In Nottingham, there have been protests and counter-protests, some scuffles there. And there are also some reports of trouble in Liverpool. Let's get more details on that from David Collins, Northern editor for the Sunday Times, who's in Liverpool for us. Hello, David.
Hello there.
Tell us what's happening in Liverpool this afternoon.
So at about 2 p.m. there was a protest, which loosely is the kind of they call themselves the Enough is Enough protesters, which has kind of been stoked by the far right. Probably important to note that I wouldn't say that everybody down there that I saw at 2 o'clock was the far right. A lot of local people. People had come from Southport. One guy I met from Bradford, who's just concerned about the levels of immigration. But they have what started as a peaceful protest at about 2 o'clock really escalated about maybe 30 to 40 minutes later, when an anti-fascist group kind of marched from another part of the city. The two groups clashed. And then within the space of minutes, I mean, there were thousands down at Liverpool waterfront on a street called the Strand, which is where you've got the Liver building, an iconic building down there, the Albert Dock, where you've got the Beatles Museum. But that whole stretch there, it really caught a lot of people by surprise. There was a lot of families in cars that I saw kind of doing urgent kind of 3-point turns. There were bottles, rocks. I almost get hit by a bottle at one point. There was a police officer injured, a young woman I saw on the floor, surrounded by her colleagues, when the kind of people around us shouting, "You deserve it," and things about kind of immigration. So it has, there has been violence down here today.
And that is an area where, of course, there are a lot of families, a lot of visitors travel to the area. It must be pretty worrying times for them. And tell us a bit more about the police reaction to this.
Yeah, I mean, the police, last night when I was at the mosque in Liverpool, the Merseyside police have a really good reputation. They're seen as a really good police force. Trust in police forces is low. Merseyside police are seen as one of the good ones. And last night, they were very organised in terms of controlling kind of protesters who turned up at the mosque. This morning, largely they've been in control. There were periods of lawlessness, I'd say. A lot of masked men running around, throwing things, throwing chairs. I saw lots of police officers, well, not lots, three to four of them, who lost their feet at different points in the scuffles. I don't think anything on the level that we saw in Southport, but there has been violence.
David Collins, Northern Editor for the Sunday Times. Thanks so much for joining us from Liverpool.
Thank you.
Let's talk to Ivan Humble. Now, he used to be a regional organiser for the English Defence League, but now works with the New Day Starts to campaign against hatred and extremism. Good afternoon to you, Ivan.
Oh, yeah,
What do you make of what we're seeing in places like Liverpool today?
shocking. It's inexcusable. There's nothing I can say that will make things better for that. Do you know what I mean?
And you used to work with the English Defence League. Just explain how you got involved there.
I didn't work with them. I was part of it, if you know what I mean. So, just a little quick kind of snippet. In 2009, the Troops Homecoming Parade, I watched that from my home. Part of the way around, I noticed there was a disturbance from a group of Muslim men. That instantly angered me, not because I hated Muslims back then, but because at the same time I was doing a lot of charity work for the Royal Anglian soldiers locally to where I live. So some of the soldiers on the parade that day I knew, and we'd been raising money for them for about 3 or 4 years before that. So that was my anger. But then when I started researching more about the group that did that demonstration against our troops, I discovered it was a man called Adnan Chowdhury. I started researching him, and back in 2009, there was so much of his stuff online that I fell down a bit of a rabbit hole myself. I started researching the group, the other people in the group, and then I become really knowledgeable on his interpretation of Islam. But also, it furthered my anger as well because some of the stuff that group was saying at the time about taking over and would all be Muslims, would live under Sharia law and stuff like that back then.
And at what stage did you start to realise that perhaps the English Defence League was not at the sort of organisation that you should be a part of?
That's kind of a good question because I never considered that once. I never thought that once because I wanted to do something to help the troops. So I kind of had an epiphany moment, I guess, when a local Muslim to us in Ipswich bought a church, and we were told it was going to be a super mosque. So instead of calling a demonstration straight away, I went over to speak to the Muslim guy and found a little bit of common ground that day, where we met a couple of times after that. And the one thing I will say about this Muslim guy is, in the 5 and a bit years, I was wrapped up in hate. Not one white person wanted to speak to me about my viewpoints or anything. They'd just rather point their finger and label me. But this Muslim guy, the Muslim I hated the most, the one with the brown skin and the big beard and everything, he was the one person that wanted to sit me down and listen to me to find out what my problem was or issues were.
So how do you go about now trying to stop people from getting involved in organisations like the English Defence League?
You just have to challenge people online because the online space is so vast and unpoliceable sometimes that I just start talking to people online. Do you know what I mean? I do a lot of work in schools as well, where we go in and talk about identity, belonging, counter narratives towards hatred and that kind of thing. So education is really important, I think, because I wouldn't say I was thick back then, but I was uneducated on certain things because the town I live in today is still 99.4% white. So I never had that chance growing up to get to know the other person or anybody of difference. So like when I started to live, after I spoke to that Muslim and he showed me the respect to listen to me, and he obviously listened to me and said, you've got some genuine concerns that he shared, but I've had lots of misconceptions around certain elements of what I was saying.
And we're seeing now this afternoon reports from Hull that 3 police officers have been injured, 4 people have been arrested. Do you think that the English Defence League or aspects of it are now fueling this violence?
I don't think it's ideal at all. Do you know what I mean? Because, like you said earlier, it was dispersed, it's disbanded. But what is still there is the anger, the frustration of being labelled and not being able to have your voice heard properly. Because when we don't have those conversations in the public sphere, people's options are limited. People on the right are talking about these issues that concern a lot of people. So they're able to manipulate that genuine concern of a lot of people into their narrative. But there's still an underlying issue that needs dealing with. So unless we start having those public conversations and talking to everybody with whatever view they've got, then we can expect to see a bit of change. Because at the minute, with certain people not being heard, how can MPs or politicians make policies or things to make everything work for everybody? There's a reason people don't vote, because there's not a political party out there that speaks to the ordinary person on the street.
We'll have to leave it there. Ivan Humble from the New Day Starts, which campaigns against hatred and extremism. Thanks so much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you.